What's the good word, y'all? So ahead of the November 1st NFL trade deadline, we're starting to get rumors creeping in. And the most recent one, and a very interesting one, is that Joe Douglas may be shopping cornerback Bryce Hall. Now, when we think back, Bryce Hall was a fifth round draft pick. But for those that remember, prior to him catching his injury before the draft, many people thought that he could have went in the first round, maybe early in the second, and then he free falled all the way down to the fifth round where we scooped him up, and I think we got a very high return on investment. Now, for Bryce Hall and kind of what he's been able to do so far, 19 pass deflections, he's grabbed an interception for himself. We've been able to also use him in a couple blitz instances, so he has a half a sack on his resume. But in 2022, he ends up being relegated essentially completely to the bench. He's been a part of one game so far, and he only played 5 defensive snaps. And this is after a preseason where he ended up getting torched quite a bit during the so-called competition between him and Sauce Gardner to see who was going to get the number one pick. Uh, I feel like it was somewhat of a true competition. There's no reason why you split half the snaps as frequently as we did. But for all intents and purposes, Sauce Gardner definitely had the more consistent um, output and was able to show the coverage skills and the ability in man and zone better than what Bryce Hall was able to do. So Bryce Hall, in his own right, though, has been able to be a very above serviceable cornerback. The big knock on him, which is why we went out and revamped the cornerback room, and this applied to everybody, was that he didn't get his hands on the ball enough. Yes, he got pass deflections, but there weren't any really game changing plays. And we did get some quotables from anonymous sources that ended up advising that they were never concerned throwing Bryce Hall's way because, worst case scenario, he was going to blanket his man and deflect the pass, but they were never concerned that he was going to take a ball back to the house or flip field coverage by snagging a football. And he's definitely had a bit of butterfingers there as well. There's been a number of passes he could have got that he just hasn't sealed the deal on. But he just seems like a player that's more focused on stopping his man rather than causing turnovers. So that's a part of his game that can definitely improve. But to say that anybody would expected him to free fall the way he did, it would have been a far cry. I mean, we even figured as much as putting him at free safety, seeing if he can maybe cover some slot snaps whenever Michael Carter II need to come out, or maybe even replacing Michael Carter II as having him be the backup nickelback. But it ended up working its way out that he hasn't really been needed or necessarily earned the playing time, depending on who you're speaking to. But you can't throw out his statistics. I mean, 26 games worth of experience. When we take a look at what he did last year, 63.6 completion percentage, 106.6 passer rating when thrown in his area. He was also able to contribute to special teams quite a bit, and he played 98% of the defensive snaps last year. So he has absolutely been a huge part of what the defense did in terms of building a lot of this foundational piece. He's also been a stalwart. I mean, in this day and age where we're kind of getting the rumblings of Elijah Moore being a little bit upset, some grumblings about Zach Wilson kind of being a game manager, Denzel Mims and his trade request. We haven't heard anything from Bryce Hall, and whenever you do get, him on an interview, him on a podcast, is extremely high. It's extremely almost passive in whatever graces and good sayings are coming his way. Now, what was interesting to me is he's still on a rookie contract, so very cheap, $973,000 this year. He's only due 1.08 million next year because he's a fifth round rookie. There hasn't been a great market for cornerbacks when it comes to getting traded. I mean, when we're talking straight up pick for player, the highest that we've seen in the last year or two has been Troy Hill when he was traded from the Browns to the Rams, and that was for a fifth rounder. Now, there's a case where maybe we can get at least the original draft, selection that we got back, which would have been a fifth rounder. Keep in mind, though, Troy Hill isn't a great example. He played a lot longer in the year in his career by the time that he was traded, and the Rams were, willing to offer up a lot more, as we've kind of seen, which is a trend for them. So I don't know what we're looking at. I would imagine, though, that Joe Douglas has his sights set. If Denzel Mims is at least a fourth rounder, I would say at least a third, potentially as high as a second, but anywhere from a second rounder to the fifth, I think is definitely in the conversation for it, or maybe multiple mid-round picks if they're willing to settle for like a fourth and a fifth. Or we could even be using him as trade bait to potentially lock up a player-for-player swap, which has been the more favorable trend in this situation. It's been a player and a pick in that situation. And so when you take a look at things like tackle, maybe it's not so much likely anymore that would be the pick with us bringing in Mike Rimmer, Cedric Ogilvie. Granted, they're not going to be here for the long term, but we still have Dwayne Brown, who will be back next year. We still have Mekhi Becton, who will be returning. We have Max Mitchell, who's looking better as advertised. So we could be looking maybe at a linebacker, maybe as a safety, as a, something to look forward to drafting and stashing for the future. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Would you welcome a Bryce Hall trade? He still is critical depth for us. If anything were to happen with Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, Brandon Echols seems like the next man up, but things can turn scary very quickly if that doesn't end up being the case. I mean, Brandon Echols is still much younger in his career than what Bryce Hall is. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are, and I will catch you guys again. Peace.